So I think that maybe we can start. I see that a lot of people already joined. So I'm going to break the ice for this session. The session is about ocean robotics in climate action. And myself and Karen will be the host and moderators for this session. So I will introduce myself first, then we will pass the ball between me and Karen to guide all of you during the discussion. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Marcello Calisti again. I'm from University of Lincoln. I work mostly on bio-inspired and soft robotics, which is a strange thing. So I'm putting here a link. I was not capable of preparing let's say, a purpose link for this, but this is an overview from when I was a PhD student to what I'm doing right now. So it's a very, very long video just to give you an idea, 4 minutes, to give you an idea of those elements that I'm working on. But to get right onto this session, now I'm working on especially on underwater-legged robots, which are bio-inspired robots that work on the seabed, and in this way we can improve our performances in terms of interaction, time that we can stay underwater, and times that we can spend collecting samples or working and restoring the environment. I did a little bit of litter pollution, and I saw also in the session there is a former PhD student of mine that now she's doing a PhD in Brussels, so Rossana, hi, and she did part of this work as well. That's all for me, and I'm passing the ball to Karen.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm the second moderator for the session. It's so nice to see all of you. I'm really excited to hear what everybody has to say this afternoon. I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Geography at Clark University, which is in Massachusetts. I've been there for 17 years now as a professor. And in particular, I'm really interested in the impacts of climate change in the polar regions. I've had projects in the Antarctic, the Arctic, and also in the Himalayan region, the third pole. But most recently, I've primarily been working in the Arctic, looking at the impacts of climate warming on permafrost thaw and how that impacts river biogeochemistry and sort of river-ocean interactions. But primarily, most recently, I've been working on looking at questions surrounding the impacts of sea ice decline and climate warming on marine ecosystems in the Arctic. So I've had a lot of NASA and National Science Foundation funding to go out to sea. I spent a lot of time on icebreakers, deploying instruments and things like that. Some of our field sites we've been visiting through colleagues for 30, 35 years to kind of understand how change is occurring to these marine ecosystems. A lot of my work is sort of at the intersection of satellite remote sensing and geospatial analytics, and how that helps to sort of inform what we find in the field as well. But I do spend a lot of time sort of throwing instruments off of ships into the water column and standing on sea ice and deploying instruments through the sea ice to understand the under ice water column as well. So I'm going to send it back to Marcello, and he's going to just give us a little bit of a setup of the session, and then we'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Karen, again. So the session and the goal of this session is to explore the role that ocean robotics has for with respect to climate actions. As we said as we saw in the introduction as well, we realized that climate robotics itself is a fuzzy term. It's not exactly clear what it is right now. So for us and for this session, the goal is to understand what are the solutions that the startups that are presenting today and the people that are presenting today, they are working on what is the impact that they have to date and the specific areas that they are making progress on. And of course, if they can explain us a little bit also what are the challenges that still are remaining, that will be extremely useful. The idea, again, as Patrick said continuously, is an informal chat among people passionate about the ocean and passionate about the climate. No, the ocean is more than 70% in surface our planet, and in volume is even more. and is mostly unexplored. So there is everything that we can learn and we can, let's say, exploit, but in a good way from the ocean, and we will be very pleasant to hear from you. Said so, I will pass the ball again to Karen, that she will do the first call for questions and speakers.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. And that is Joyeeta, who's the CEO and co-founder of SamudraOceans. And I'm going to let her sort of say a few words about herself and her interest and her background. And also, I think, you know, sort of in these introductory remarks, you sort of have 3 sort of points to address for your audience as well, which is what specific challenge you're working on. And then secondly, why the climate problem you're tackling is essential. And then thirdly, what are you doing to tackle this climate problem? So if you want to sort of weave those thoughts into your introductory remarks, I will pass it over to you first, Joyeeta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate it. I'm so inspired and excited to see amazing people on the panel today and potentially in the audience as well. I'm Joyeeta. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Samudra, and we make aqua robots, so robots for the ocean. My background is in embedded electronics engineering with a bit of robotics. I've ended up doing a whole lot of AI in the last 10 years. I was working in the Valley and ended up being an accidental founder, and had a pretty quick exit and decided to become an entrepreneur after the first accident. This is my 4th venture, and I mostly build deep tech ventures. I've been lucky or unlucky enough to have pretty fast exits in a couple of them. And I've learned this way that I've actually ended up having a career where I've spent a long time making deep tech without the thought of how it actually impacts the environment and the greater carbon story. So the last few years post the epidemic that happened, and my daughter was born 3.5 years ago, and all of that made me think that maybe it makes most sense to use my robotics and AI in a direction that takes out carbon very proactively, because nothing else seemed to make a lot of sense. So that's how I crossed the pond and went from very, very glamorous, Valley tech to doing what I do today about 4 years ago. The main problem we're focusing on Samudra is about capturing blue carbon with the help of solutions that actually empower coastal economies as well. So we make robotics to scale sea farming, particularly seaweed and crustaceans. We also deploy the same robotics for conservation projects, especially if they're seagrass or wild seaweed. We focus mainly on monitoring equipment with in situ AI that produces dashboards, and also has a lot of AI-ready cameras deployed in the robotics, mostly visual deep learning. What that means is you're able to have offshore data that is very visual as well as non-visual, but high density, high frequency, and starts to go and sit in various AI models that can predict the behavior of farms, help farms commercialize them further, identify endangered biodiversity and species that the farm may be touching or impacting, and what does that mean? So it basically helps to scale up operations and also make it quite sustainable by just being auto-monitored all the time. We are deployed across 600 hectares in UK. We have the largest farm in UK, in Scotland, and a couple others in northern and southern England. And we have 3 farms in Jamaica, a test farm in Barbados, Canada, and 1 coming up in Oman. So I think we will be covering over 3,000 hectares by the end of this year. And the main thing we are focusing on when we deploy our robotics and scale this is 2 different metrics. The first one is how much carbon are we capturing by enabling the scaling of blue farms? And 2 is how much are we revitalizing the coastal economy? Most of these farms are in very rundown tier 2, tier 3 coastal towns. By being able to create more jobs, by increasing the scale of their operations, it also changes how the most, environmentally sensitive communities, such as coastal communities, are able to get financially empowered and get blue and white collar jobs, which also greatly improves their outlook and is a bit of mitigation as well. So I'd say it's adaptation and mitigation at the same time, and has a wider social implication as well, apart from carbon uptake.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So Marcello, I'm going to have you introduce the next speaker.
Sure. So I will introduce Niall McGrath in his quest to restore seagrass from the seabed. Niall has a background in engineering, I think, from University of Edinburgh, if I'm not wrong, and now is working on this new effort in bringing a restoration on the seabed thanks to the seagrass. So Niall, it's over to you. What we would like to know is, again, as we said before, what are the specific challenges that you are working right now, and why this problem that you are tackling you think that is the most relevant, and what are the next action that you would like to do?
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm from Belfast originally, but I'm based in Edinburgh. And while I was a student, graduated 2 years ago, and while I was a student just before COVID, I founded Robocean with the idea of mechanizing seagrass restoration for large-scale nature-based climate solutions. But I mean, I guess I'll frame the picture to begin with. I mean, climate robotics is a wide area, and I'm sure lots of us are targeting nature-based solutions within that. But seagrass meadows, for me, has always been something quite interesting. So in the last 100 years, we've lost 1/3 of global seagrass coverage, and particularly in the UK, we've lost 92%, so basically eradicated. And these ecosystems are invaluable, and they can capture CO2 up to 35 times faster than tropical rainforests. Bit of a cherry-picked stat, but putting it even in more clear terms, they only occupy something like 0.1% of the seafloor, but they're responsible for around 10 to 12% of all organic oceanic carbon storage. So they're incredibly important, especially when it comes to biodiversity. They also supply, I think, around 20% of the world's fisheries. So as a food source as well, incredibly valuable. But the good news is recent restoration efforts have shown that seagrass is ready to thrive again. You know, we've got, particularly in the UK and there's lots around the world, but we've got like the likes of Project Seagrass, WWF, Ocean Conservation Trust, Virginia Institute of Marine Science out in Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, obviously, doing great work and demonstrating that there are restoration practices which we can take to bring these ecosystems back to life and help them thrive again. But unfortunately, it's insanely expensive and really too slow and inefficient to sort of make up for lost time and start growing these ecosystems rather than slowing our loss rate. Some estimates say it takes around 2,000 volunteers 6 months to plant 1 football pitch of seagrass, so around 1 hectare, and it costs $200,000. Really extortionate, really unaffordable, quite inaccessible for most of the world. So a few years ago, after learning this fact, doing an engineering degree at the University of Edinburgh, I thought, okay, well, why don't we try and do something about it? Well, as an engineer, let's try and mechanize that and make these processes more efficient like we do in every other industry. So Robocean, which is a name that we only came up with because we had to hit a word count on a grant application, and now we're stuck with it because the application was successful. We used to joke about how all subsea robotics companies have terrible names, and now I'm one of them. But you know what? It's kept us going so far. So essentially at Robocean, what we're trying to do is revolutionize seagrass restoration through next generation of subsea robotics, mechanizing the entire restoration process from seed to sapling to enable scalable, accessible, and affordable nature-based climate solutions. With the idea being that you will no longer need a 2,000 people strong volunteer force to restore 1 football pitch. Instead, you can come work with us. We can do almost surgical, dynamic, responsive, and bespoke restoration projects to support coastal communities, their economies, and biodiversity. And there's a bit of coastal erosion protection sprinkled in there as well. So not necessarily from a carbon capture point. I say that specifically because these ecosystems are so much more than just a carbon credit. And I think we really need to highlight those values. But we are trying to make seagrass restoration similarly as accessible to the like of kelp forest and seaweed farming. And it's still early days right now. We're developing our tech right here in Edinburgh in the Royal Observatory, but we are hoping to bring it to market in the next 18 months or something like that. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much and good luck. And now I'm hand it over to Karen.
Great, thank you so much. So our third speaker is Ester Strømmen. A great pleasure of introducing her as part of the panel as well. And she is from Syrenna. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. She's the co-founder and CEO. And just to sort of keep on task as well, if you have a chance to tell us a little bit about your background and interests, and then the specific challenge you're working on, why the climate problem you're tackling is essential, and what you're doing to tackle this climate problem. So Ester, I'll hand things over to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Ester Strømmen. I used to be a management consultant. So I used to do something very different before I became a founder. So in our case, I'm the business co-founder, and then it's my co-founder and CTO, Alex, who is a professor in robotics, who came up with the idea of what we call the water drones. So I really feel you, Niall, in terms of, yeah, you picked something, we called it a water drone in a grant application, and then it stuck. And our investors love calling it a water drone. And robotics people hate calling it a water drone because that's it sounds really stupid. But people outside of this space, you know, they understand what it is. And exactly, that's our first robotics product, is essentially a robotics solution with 1 degree of freedom. So we have made a profiler which moves up and down, and then we have a data platform where all data is collected in. And we are specifically geared towards ocean monitoring for industry. And that's what I really burn for. I am super interested in, and what we are really working on is the parallel crises that we currently have going on the planet. So we have an energy crisis that we feel very intensely, especially here in Norway, where I'm sitting right now. We are a huge oil nation, currently actively trying to figure out what comes after oil, and should really be front runners in this field. But at the same time, as you are looking at then new technologies that you want to get going, there first and foremost offshore wind, you also have a biodiversity crisis that you are looking at, and you have a climate crisis that you are looking at, and you know the list can go on and on. We have these parallel crises, and we just have to find better ways, better, greener ways of creating energy. And offshore wind, which is our primary market that we are going into, is an incredible opportunity to do so. But right, let's not make the same mistakes that we have made before. So let's make sure that there are impressive and well thought out ocean monitoring regimes in place. There is fantastic technology on the market. We are completely sensor agnostic as a solution, and microplastic sensors are coming quite far. You're finding more and more solutions and ways of gathering really insightful data that is interesting both to the consortiums who are building offshore wind, but also for governments, for NGOs, for researchers. There are more and more players who are really interested in this and have vested interest in something like this really succeeding as we look towards creating a more sustainable future. Because we have to have alternate energy sources, but they do not have to degrade our planet to the extent that the energy sources we have been using thus far are doing. So that is what we really burn for. We aim to keep industry accountable in the ocean. You know, we are just blowing past our planetary boundaries, and industry is not something that is going to go away. Industry is something that is hopefully going to help us get out of some of these crises, but then we have to balance that against protection and care of really vulnerable wildlife, and then especially the ocean.
That's fantastic, Ester. Thank you so much. So great. So Marcello, I'll have you introduce our final speaker on our panel.
Amazing. So the final speaker is Frédéric Stoll, engineer at Jellyfish Bot. Maybe is a better name than the other companies. And he, of course, has on his shoulder the burden of Jacques Cousteau, one of our first explorer of the underwater environment. So we are expecting great things from you, Frédéric. Again, what is the specific challenge you are working on, why it's important, and what are you doing to tackle it?
Thank you very much, Marcello. Hi everyone, my name is Fred. Well, I'm basically not a robotician at all. It's funny, and thanks very much for mentioning Jacques Cousteau. I spent 25 years of my life as a naval officer, just as he did at the time, spending a lot of time on the oceans and performing several kinds of blue water operations, then again brown water operations on the shoreline, and always witnessing marine pollution. I joined IADYS a couple of years ago. IADYS is the name of the company, and found a wonderful ecosystem here to tackle marine pollution on the shoreline. Our start